Hey y'all, Van Lufa here to do day 5 and the final recap for the first week of the Derek Chauvin trial. And again, like I say, watching and recapping the Derek Chauvin trial so you don't have to. Today was a shorter day. They just went in the morning, so it was kind of nice, so I can make this video and then go about my day, because this is my only day off this week. So, you know, I've got funner things planned. Okay, so at the beginning of today, there were just 2 exhibits that were entered, 75 and 267. Those were received, no problem. We started with State's Witness number 18, who's Sgt Edwards. He is a sergeant for the Minneapolis Police Department. He has worked there for 14 years. He talked a little bit about his education. He worked overnights. He also worked on the community response team, which included things like narcotics and prostitution. He also was on the community engagement unit for 2 years, and these officers worked directly with the community and their needs at that time. On the evening of 5/25/20, he was working. His shift started at 8:30 p.m. He did the roll call. He stated that he didn't know Chauvin personally, but he knew who he was just because they both worked at the same place. He also knew officers Tao, Lane, and King, but kind of in the same way, not outside of work, but just as, co-workers. On May 25th of 2020, while he was finishing up the roll call briefing, he did receive a phone call from Sergeant Pluger, who called him and gave him the information. He was at Sergeant Pluger was at the hospital with the male who, quote unquote, may or may not live. And so Sgt Edwards was asked to go to the scene at 38th and Chicago, just to get the ball rolling in case it turned into a critical incident. At that point, it was not, confirmed a critical incident, but he wanted him to go to the scene and just start thinking about that and start taking the steps that he needed to do. And the policy for a critical incident states that the scene has to be locked down to preserve any evidence that might be there. He also needed to call and make arrangements for the officer King and Lane to be escorted to City Hall. When he got there, the area was being canvassed and people were looking for witnesses, and he was waiting for investigators to arrive. Exhibit 1 was a map of the scene. He arrived at approximately 9:35 p.m. King and Lane were there. His body cam was on. And then exhibits 81 through 95 were just still images from his body cam footage. He told King and Lane to turn their body cams on at that time. They did. He asked where they had the interaction with Mr. Floyd. They told him it was by the car in front of the store. He did show on the map of the scene where the crime scene tape was placed. He also asked for more officers to come to the scene just to help keep the area secure. He didn't know the specifics at that point. At that point, he contacted the Cups food manager and spoke to him. At that time, he also secured King and Lane's vehicle and Floyd's vehicle. He interacted with an older gentleman at the scene who turned out to be Charles McMillan. He asked for information from Mr. McMillan because he, was there, but Mr. McMillan refused. So at that time, he told Lane and King to just chill out until their escorts got there to take them to City Hall. But he did tell them to keep their body cams on. Again, he went into the Cup Foods, spoke with the manager, The manager told him that he did not witness the incident. And then shortly after that, Lieutenant Zimmerman from Homicide arrived. Sergeant Dale also arrived with Lieutenant Zimmerman. When Zimmerman arrived, he checked to make sure that the scene was secure. He told Zimmerman what he had done thus far. He wanted more officers at the scene. Sergeant Bob Dale from Homicide was also there. Zimmerman asked for a crime scene log. And what that is a list of names of everyone who had entered the crime scene. One of Edwards' officers, Officer Areola, started the crime scene log. Then he found out that Floyd, so later on in the evening, he found out that Floyd had died. Sergeant Dale had told him that. And then arrangements were made to get King and Lane to City Hall. At that point, it was a critical incident, and then he was notified that the BCA was en route to the scene. Special Agent Michael Phil arrived from the BCA, and in case you don't know, I guess I've said BCA a lot, but it stands for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. At that point, the BCA took over the scene. The BCA was going to take possession of the squad car 320, which was King and Lane's squad car where the incident happened. And they were also going to take possession of Floyd's vehicle. The BCA then had those vehicles towed away. Then Agent Phil said they were done and that they could take down the crime scene tape. Of course, I say this quickly, but the tape was taken down at 3:34 a.m. So this process took hours. And then there was no cross-examination by the defense. State's witness number 19 was Richard Zimmerman. He has worked for the Minneapolis Police Department since June 5th of 1985. Of note, he is currently the highest ranking in seniority member at the Minneapolis PD. They talked about his duties while he was a patrol officer for the MPD. This was funny, in 1990 he joined what was called the crack team. And he stated that crack was becoming more and more prevalent in the late 80s, early 90s in Minneapolis. So he worked on that team for 3 years. Then in 1993, he decided to take the sergeant's exam and passed. And once he became a sergeant, he went to the sex crimes unit. He talked about what his responsibilities were there. And then in 1995, he joined Homicide. In 2006, he took the lieutenant exam and was promoted, but he did get to stay in Homicide at this time. So he took over the lieutenant of Homicide job in 2008. He does get calls for any suspicious death that takes place. He would then go and assess the scene and then call one of his teams who are on call at that time to come out and start working the scene. So he apparently gets to see every death that takes place in Minneapolis. They get reports of every death. And then he looks through all of those reports and determines if any of those deaths seem suspicious and need to be looked into any further, and then he assigns them to his team members. He was called to the scene on 5/25/20. He always responds to critical incidents. He arrived around 10 p.m. And then he just described what he saw when he got there. Exhibit 96 was a video of him arriving to the scene. At first, he spoke to Officers King and Lane because Officer Edwards was on the phone at that time. Well, I should say Sergeant Edwards was on the phone at that time and looked busy. After speaking with them, he did determine that they were involved officers. He also asked for more officers to come to the scene. He called in his on-call team for Homicide. He had learned that Mr. Floyd had died and that the BCA was going to take over. At approximately 11 p.m., the BCA arrived and he turned the scene over to them. He gave them a little bit of a report just to tell them what had happened, what he knew, and what they had done thus far. Then they turned to the use of force training. They receive it every year. They just talked about the training and the policies of use of force. And he stated in all of his years of training, he has never been taught to kneel on the back with a knee on someone who is handcuffed and prone. Or excuse me, he is not trained to kneel on the neck with his knee on someone who is handcuffed and prone. That would be considered deadly force, and that's the top tier of use of force. Another policy that states, if you cuff someone, they are now your responsibility, including their safety and well-being. Once a person is cuffed, their threat level goes way down, considerably, he said. And he stated that if a person is cuffed and not combative, they should use less force. He did have some training in the prone position. Once they are prone and cuffed, they need to be taken out of that position ASAP because it restricts their breathing. When a person is cuffed behind their back, it stretches their muscles of the chest, making it more difficult for them to breathe. They need to be turned on to their side, again, he mentioned. They are taught some medical training, including CPR, and they are required to give medical aid if necessary. Okay, maybe that light is just a little bit better. Okay, so they talked about how they were taught to provide medical aid to a person who is having a medical emergency. Even if EMS is called, they still need to assist. Then they took a mid-morning break because of course they did. When they came back from break, they were still talking to Lieutenant Zimmerman. He had stated that the next day he did review video of the incident, and he actually watched the bystander video in its entirety. And since then, he had watched more, so he had watched the body cam footage. He agreed that it was a use of force situation, and that there was no change in that use of force until the EMT got there. In his opinion, the lieutenant states that the use of force was totally unnecessary. He even went as far to say as it was uncalled for. He saw no reason why the officers felt that they were in danger. And in his opinion, that force should have stopped after he was in handcuffs and placed on the ground. Okay, on cross-examination by Eric Nelson. This was interesting. So Nelson just came right out of the gate and said, so it's fair to say you have not patrolled the streets since 1993. So for like 27 years or so. He said yes. He was in an investigative role after that. And that his daily role is a plainclothes police officer. And that his only use of force is through training. He doesn't actually go use force out on the streets anymore, is what he was trying to imply. He stated the last time he got into a physical fight with someone was in 2018. And so Eric Nelson said the frequency with which you have to use higher levels of force does not happen that often, correct? And he said yes. He said, and some tactics have changed since you have become a police officer. And he agreed, yes. He agreed you do not teach tactics or use of force at the academy. And he said, no, he does not. And he agreed that the use of force policies help address the legal aspects of use of force. He then asked him if he was familiar with the Minneapolis PD critical thinking model. He had. And would he argue that the training he received at the academy then is a lot different than now? And he said yes. He said there are more available tools now, such as body cams and tasers, and Lieutenant Zimmerman said yes. He talked about scene security. He asked about medical training again. He agreed that there are factors that come into play and that cops have a lower level of medical training. They are first responders. And that MPD policy does state that if they need a higher level of care, then they need to call EMS. And then he asked, do you agree that if you are in a fight for your life, are you able to use any means necessary to protect yourself and others? He said, yes. I have some opinions on that I'll keep to myself. On redirect from the state, he said he had the opportunity to view the body cams and that it also captured the bystanders on the sidewalks. Yes, it did. Were those bystanders an uncontrollable threat to the officers? He stated no. Could they have called for backup? Yes. He was asked by the defense if use of force training has changed over the years, but the important point is that he still gets the most up-to-date use of force training yearly. So what he learned, 30, 40 years ago doesn't matter. He still gets the most up-to-date training every year. He asked him, when you watched all the footage, did you see Floyd ever kicking the officers? He said no. Then they talked about a statement that's called holding for EMS. And he wanted to know, does holding for EMS provide an officer an excuse not to provide medical help? And he said no. And then he asked, from the body cam footage that you saw, did you see any need for Mr. Chauvin to improvise and put a knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? And he said no. And then that wrapped up the day. So that is my day 5 recap, a little bit shorter than the others. And we'll see what is in store for Monday. Thank you guys for watching. Continue to keep your comments. If you have any questions, ask and I will help if I sure can. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.